Good afternoon. In my capacity as Provost of Trinity College and current Chair of the Irish Universities Association, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this important and timely debate on the future of Irish higher education and research. The debate is organised by the Irish Universities Association, the IUA, the Union of Students in Ireland, the USI, the Technological Higher Education Association, TIA, and the Royal Irish Academy, the RIA. And their coming together underlines the deep shared concern about higher education and research in Ireland. Last Thursday, USI, TIA and the IUA made a joint statement calling for all political parties to commit to invest in higher education to prevent Ireland losing ground against international competitors, warning that state funding per student in Ireland at third level is now 40% less than it was a decade ago. Students, academics and researchers are at one on this issue. There's a crisis. The crisis was spelled out in the Castles report 4 years ago. A number of recommendations were made which have not been acted on. We're sitting on a time bomb. And when I say we, I don't just mean the higher education sector, I mean we, the country. It depends on cutting-edge research and groundbreaking innovation. The country and our economic prosperity depends on an educated and talented workforce. As we enter a period of huge growth in the student population, our universities are being overtaken in the global rankings by institutions around the world with better public funding. The time to act is now. We have the resources, but do we have the political leadership? Higher education funding should be an electoral priority for all political parties. Unfortunately, I haven't seen it prioritised in manifestos or debates so far. However, the organisers of today's event are helping to inject the necessary urgency into the issue, and I thank them. And I thank most warmly the representatives of political parties here today. I know how hard-pressed you are and how many other campaign issues are needful of your attention. We welcome Minister Mary Mitchell-O'Connor, TD Fine Gael, Thomas Byrne, TD Fianna Fáil, Donncha O'Leary, TD Sinn Féin, Richard Boyd Barrett, TD People Before Profit, Senator Ivana Bacik, Labour, Angus O'Muelong, Social Democrats, and Councillor Nasa Hourigan, Green Party. To convene the debate, we welcome Shane Coleman, presenter of News Talk's flagship breakfast programme and regular contributor to the Irish Independent and Sunday Independent. Previously political editor and business editor of the Sunday Tribune, he's the author of 4 best-selling books on Irish politics and is a graduate of Trinity College, and we're delighted to welcome him back here today to host this debate. Shane.
So by all means, let's have forceful points, forceful debate, but let's be polite and respectful of our speakers. Okay, we are going to start by asking each of our speakers just to give us a 1 minute, and I will be strict about 1 minute, a quick 1 minute address, just to, I suppose, set out their party's vision on the future of education and research.
So could I start off by saying congratulations, heartfelt congratulations to the IUA, TIA, USI and the RIA. When I was involved in the student movement not so long ago, the idea that those 4 organisations could get together to agree on anything was fairly remarkable. And the fact that you managed to come together in such a clear manifesto and vision for higher education is remarkable. So congratulations on that, and indeed thank you for the invitation. Education, and higher education in particular, is one of the great success stories of Ireland. But that is due more so to, I think, the abiding affection and respect that the Irish people have for education than any coherent funding system that has been established to date. We, despite all of that, have one of the highest participation rates in the world, which is fantastic, but when we have 99% of young people in one Dublin postcode attending HE and around 15% in another, there's clearly a problem. I believe education is a right, and that includes higher education. And I believe that we need to fund higher education so that it is the public good that it is in reality. As the student population surges, in particular over the next 10 years, we really do need to get to grips with this. There is a wave coming and continuing as we do now, where, as Professor Prendergast said, we've lost 40% of funding per student over the last 10 years. Continuing that way is a recipe for disaster.
I think it's fair to say that the last 4 years have been a period lost. I'm sure the Minister will disagree, but in my view that is the case in relation to higher education. We have lost time. The process that was started in relation to castles and the options that were put forward there at that point, I think a consensus has to some greater or lesser extent emerged between organisations such as the USI and the IUA that whatever funding source you produce, ultimately third level needs to be funded adequately. It is of crucial importance to obviously everyone who attends and works in the university and third level sector, but it is of crucial strategic importance to Ireland as a whole and to our economy. It contributes about 9 billion to the Irish economy per annum. In my view, the debate in relation to an income contingent loan, I think we have moved on from that. I think it's been well established that that's not sustainable in this for Ireland. We believe in publicly funded education, but we also believe it's not just enough to say that. We are committed to getting rid of third level fees. It is also necessary, above and beyond that, to commit to substantially additional funding.
Okay.
We are committing to that in our manifesto of 117 additional million.
It's always been my firm and passionate belief as a Trinity senator, also as a former Students' Union activist 30 years ago in the Buttery, Shane, alongside my colleagues then, and as a parent indeed, and an educator myself, it's been my firm and passionate belief, as it is for Labour, that education should be free from cradle to grave, based on universal access, paid for indirectly through taxation. It's a fundamental principle of socialism, and it's what we stand for. And for that reason, when I spoke previously about the Castles report, I spoke very strongly in favour of option 1. Increase state funding. Do not introduce student loan systems, because we know that creates further disadvantage for students, and we know it saddles graduates with huge debt. We need to ensure adequate funding. I know it's a crisis, the Provost spoke about that, and we know also that current models do not work. The current government has kicked the can down the road, and we're seeing with the recent Human Capital Initiative a really worrying development towards a move towards funding almost for instrumentalising third level. We're going to see destruction of arts and humanities sector by stealth if that road is continued. We have to future-proof our education at third level and ensure creative sectors, arts, humanities, as well as STEM, are seriously and adequately invested in.
Okay, thank you for that. Ivana, next up is Councillor Nasa Harrigan, Green Party candidate in Dublin Central. Nasa.
Thank you very much for having me. I suppose our vision for higher education in Ireland is one around access, diversity and quality. In our last pre-budget submission, which was just before Christmas, we committed to 300 million in funding for the sector. I'm a former lecturer myself, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about. For us, access, we know that already around 20 to 25% of students are attending university through some kind of access or supported course. We know that issues around transport affect those choices now, issues around housing affect those choices now. We also know that the nature of our Leaving Cert affects those choices. We would like to see more care taken around issues of diversity. We were pledging 27 million towards supporting students with disabilities, students that have learning challenges, to access education. I'm the parent of a disabled child, and I can tell you that that journey doesn't start in 6th year. That journey starts in 1st class, in junior infants. You start to engage with students and bring them through and give them the skills and the technology and the access to really engage with third level. And then finally, I'm very interested in the issue of quality. So not only in terms of access to staff, we would have concerns around the gig economy and the use of part-time staff that aren't accessing proper contracts. Also, the use of PhD students in teaching. And finally, infrastructure. We pledged 100 million towards infrastructure. So that's your buildings, your facilities, what you're using in your labs. Those things are all aspects. Oh, sorry, I'm going to start.
Okay, thanks, Nasa. You're very good. Next up is the Minister of State's Department of Education with special responsibility for higher education. Of course, Fine Gael candidate, outgoing TD from Dunleera, Mary Mitchell.
So thanks very much, and I suppose I'm very honoured to have been the first minister in charge of higher education ever sitting at the cabinet table and working towards ensuring that there was funding, adequate funding, and of course, no matter what funding we get at the cabinet table, every department wants more. I just want to say though, and I want to put it on the table now, that there is €1.88 billion spent on higher education, on tertiary education. And it's really important also to say that we have increased funding since 2016 by 350 million. They are real figures. I never hear them quoted. And the €1.88 billion is a bigger department, a bigger spend in higher education than, say, for example, in the Department of Justice, in the Department for Rural Affairs, in the Department for Josepha Madigan's.
Sorry,
okay.
Your time is up.
Is my time up?
You can finish your point.
Okay, so I'm the recipient of a third level education. I come from a village where nobody hardly ever got an education. I believe to my core that education is important. I believe it's really important working with students, and they have been at the epicenter of what I have done. And my last point is that I recently heard Michael Bloomberg in Dublin Castle, and he was asked about the future of Ireland. And the future of Ireland, he said, gave three answers: education, education, education. I've been there since I was 19, 20 years of age when I started as a teacher, and I'm so proud to be sitting here. I'll answer any questions that you ask me now in the next half hour.
Okay.
State granting for horses, €6,915 per year. State grant for per student, 4,386. That's how seriously successive governments take you as students and third level education. Another shocking fact. Numbers going to university in Dublin 4, 95%. Numbers going to university in Dublin 17, 19%. That's the consequence of slashing funding by 40%, in the case of TCD by 50%, of effectively cutting grants, increasing registration fees, inhibiting access for huge numbers of students to third level education, increasingly forcing the higher education sector to depend on philanthropy, charity from billionaires and corporations essentially taking over third level education. That is absolutely not acceptable. We need to abolish all college fees. We need to increase the grants. We need to increase per capita funding and funding to all the universities to restore these things. Cost at least 436 million. Where do we get it? Currently, multinational corporations get 700 million a year in tax loopholes for research and development. I say don't give it to Google and Facebook. Take 430 million at least of those tax giveaways to big corporations, put it into our universities, put it into our students, and treat students better than horses.
Okay, thank you indeed. Okay, let's try and tease out some of those issues. There is a chance for you guys to ask questions from the floor. We will have some roving mics, but I'm going to kick off with a question. Let's start with, I think the Provost called it the sitting time bomb, the funding issue in third level. Minister, I might start with you first. Look, you correctly pointed out the increase.
€1.88 billion. And it has increased by 350 million.
Let me ask the question.
I know, but nobody ever quotes that,
well,
or nobody ever acknowledges it. I do, but nobody listens.
Okay. Here's another figure for you, another fact. Direct state funding per student to universities and Institute of Technologies is 40% less than it was a decade ago.
Yeah, but let's just go back. There is more of an investment in education now than ever before in this state, since the foundation of the state. Of course, I acknowledge that we must continue, but we can have all the drama we like, but we need to know where is the money coming from and where are we going to cut if we're going to put more money into higher education. So if I can just clarify, I suppose that doesn't sound exactly right, but what I'm really saying is the money has to be found from somewhere. There will be, our manifesto says, yes, we will keep the registration fee. The Taoiseach and I have been on record before any of the other parties stating that we will not allow a student loans. And I absolutely agree now that we must find the money within the whole revenue, within taxation, to pay for third level education.
No student loans. Cassell's is
I
dead,
have
is
said
it?
that, Shane, so often.
Okay.
Cassell's at the moment, and it's all right people quoting Cassell's and putting it into sentences,
Well,
but not
you
one
guys
of
set
them.
it up.
Not one of them knows mentioned twice here, including the Provost. We didn't kick it down the road. We actually asked.
You did kick
Sorry, I beg your pardon now, Shane. Give me a chance. We asked the Oireachtas Committee, cross-party, to come up with a solution. They didn't. They actually kicked it back to us.
Shane,
We've
that's
now
factually
sent
incorrect.
it. No, no.
factually
We've
incorrect. I'll come to you in a
sorry
second.
now.
I'll come to you. Just-
We've
finish your
now
point in a
sent
second,
it to Europe to look at it. And let me tell you, it's not just all about higher education. It's about further education. It's about apprenticeships. It's about
You've asked
long
for a
line.
report about a report.
No, no,
basically.
sorry. They're going to tell us how we need to invest. Because, Shane, no parent and no student will thank me if we make a wrong decision now.
Okay.
We have said
Well,
what
the
we
electors won't
won't
thank
do.
you, I
We
suppose.
will continue to
Okay.
invest like we've done for
Donnchadh.
350 million for the last number
Okay,
of
Mr.
years.
We have you. Donnchadh here.
I just want to deal with that point in relation to the Education Committee. That was referred to an Education Committee. I wasn't on the committee at the time. My colleague Debbie Byrne now, and I suppose, is there anyone else who's on the Iraq's Education Committee? I don't see anyone now.
Kathleen Punchin
Yeah,
was on
no,
it.
sorry, just present
Sinn
here.
Féin were
Minister-
represented
Minister
on it.
present here. The point is, it was you referred it to Europe, and it was you that decided not to.
Yeah,
and
but the
your government-
minister is right. You guys in the committee, you all sat in it.
No, that's not.
Yeah.
No, like, I mean, different parties have very clear opinions, right? And our position is that we're against or income contingent loan systems. We want to abolish third level fees, and we want to spend on it publicly. But whatever,
And
at
fund it
the
how?
core of Cassell's, there was 3 options, and it was whatever option you choose, there is a shortfall in funding. And the minister can't abdicate responsibility for whatever avenue government takes to raise that revenue that is necessary. You can't abdicate responsibility for the fact that the income
Where's
being
it coming
invested, the money being invested in the system, did not increase.
Okay,
At
Ivana
Well,
Bacik.
Can I just say this? I mean, Shane, when you say Castles is dead, you're talking about one option in Castles, and there were 3, and the first option is to increase state funding to 80%.
I think we all
So
know.
I think
we
that's-
all know which
But
one
I know-
Peter Cassell's preferred.
I know what you mean. I think
Sorry,
I
yes,
think the-
we're joined. I should say we're just joined by Thomas Byrne, a Fianna Fáil spokesperson. I know you've got a lot on your plate, so thank you for joining us, Ivana.
It's always
continue.
lovely to have a former student on the panel. Tommy did law here.
Well, you're looking well, Ivana.
Thanks, Mary. Anyway, apart from that digression, just to say that there is though a disconnection between the stated aims of those parties which say they want to see more state investment in higher education, and yet at the same time want to provide enormous money by way of tax cuts. And Brendan Howland, the leader of Labour, made this point very clearly in the debate last night. If we want to see better investment, more investment in public services, including education, we have to ensure a broad enough tax base to do it. We've done the costings. Fine Gael's tax giveaways that they're promising in their current manifesto would cost over 8 billion over 5 years. Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin, about 5 billion, because they're making promises that are unsustainable if we want to see the sort of level of state investment in third level education that we all say we want to see, that is so crucial if we want to actually challenge and tackle our staff-student ratio and include the great funding for our access programmes, like the Trinity Access Programme, which has done so much to increase diversity.
I want to bring in Nasa Harrigan there on this. Nasa, your point.
Yeah, well, look, I do think that there is an issue there about basically how much we're spending. The EU average is around 5%, and we're well below that. So I do think that we need to up the spend. We are looking at things like broadening the tax base in terms of a site value tax. windfall on industrial rezoning of lands. That would provide extra funds within the Exchequer. We do not support any type of tax breaks where we have such shortfalls in funding for basic services like healthcare, like disability services, and certainly like education.
Okay, Angus and Wellon.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that for all that Minister Mitchell O'Connor talks about increasing budget slightly, we're working from an extremely slashed base. That higher education has never really had a predictable funding base, certainly since we've gone to mass education. So we have to remember that these are political choices. The decision to have higher education so badly underfunded as it is now is a political choice. Other political choices, like Richard made, 80 million a year on the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund. These are things that we're spending money on instead of on higher education, which is, as I said before, the great success story of Ireland. Once the United Kingdom leaves the European Union in a couple of days, Ireland will have the highest tuition fees in Europe, in the European Union. That's critical that we know that's where we are. Just to finish there, just to remember that is a political choice, and that is a legacy that the Minister Mitchell O'Connor is proposing to do nothing to address.
Okay, Richard Boyd-Barrett, I'll let you come in.
Okay, I mean, listen, as a UCD student, I was on protests pre-2008 over threatened fees, talks about loans, and all the rest of it. And then in 2008, higher education, among others, took a battering, first from Fianna Fáil and the Greens, and then subsequently with ratcheted up registration
to be fair,
fees.
we were in a crisis.
By Fine Gael. Cutting higher education is cutting off your nose to spite your face. Yeah. It's destroying your future when you need to invest in your future. Can we afford it? I refer to what I said earlier on, and people really need to look at this. You see, what's never talked about is tax breaks. They always talk about expenditure at the budget. They never talk about tax breaks. And I want to repeat, €700 million and rising is given in research and development tax breaks, overwhelmingly benefiting about 10 companies. Now, that's in addition to all sorts of other tax loopholes they enjoy to pay 0 and 1% tax. Now, I say, instead of giving research and development state funding to the tune of 700 million to a small number of multinationals, give it to third-level students and third-level education.
Okay, Thomas Byrne, Fianna Fáil.
First of all, just apologise for being late. Just got delayed on the way. Apologies for that. And I'm really glad to see an education debate so full because education hasn't featured on the campaign trail so far. It hasn't featured in any of the debates on TV or in the media, as far as I know. And in fact, an opinion poll shows a very small proportion of people interested. And I think that that's a pity. And I think it's not quite as bad as that, it's just people are prioritising, obviously.
It hasn't got a mention in either of the TV debates.
No.
I think I'm right in saying so far.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Now, I would say when people prioritise, of course they prioritise housing and health. But I mean, housing and health are relative to students as well, particularly the housing crisis. Look, what we think is needed in education now is just a complete step change, particularly in relation to third level. A complete step change. That's why last summer, my leader, when he spoke to the IUA, he proposed a new Department of Higher Education. Because the Minister for Education going to the budget negotiations is fighting for his budget for schools, and obviously primary schools in particular have huge political resonance and huge political clout, and second level as well.
Okay.
But higher education needs that extra voice around the cabinet table.
And actually, while we're on that,
just say that. But I wasn't here for
no,
the question.
We'll come back to that a little bit later. No, because I know you do have a proposal on that, Minister. Just very quickly.
Do you want me to answer the question that they all answered?
Okay, go on. Yeah.
What was the exact question?
You answered the question you want to answer.
Well, I wasn't.
But no, go on. Fair enough.
But what was the question? Because I wasn't in when you
actually, that's a fair point. I should actually point out the question. It was that shortfall, 40% less. We're spending now than we were in 2008 per student.
Well, what we propose to do, and it's a major item in our budget, and by the way, our taxation plans are about 1.3 billion, and much lower than Ivana suggested. But what we've proposed, actually, it's one of the biggest points in our budget, is 100 million extra a year cumulative into higher education, which is about what the Castles report is recommending. And I think when we talk about the Castles report, everyone talks about the three options, and they are important, and they have to be discussed, and we can have any debate you want to put them. But each of them requires a significant boost from the state as well, each one of them. And we are proposing a hugely significant boost in funding, way above what has been given over the last number of years, and about what Castles proposes. But the other thing as well about Castles, and we talk about this, there's a lot of other things in Castles as well.
I do want to move on.
Postgraduate grants, student grants, and a range of other items as well that tend to be ignored but that are crucially important as
Minister, very, very quickly. You wanted to make a point.
Well, I was going to make the point about your minister that you wanted to appoint full capacity.
We are going to come back to that a little later. So let's
again, just talking about Cassell's report, I mean, everyone talks about it. It's like the Bible, but nobody has read it. And what the Cassell's report actually...
I think some of us have read it.
Well, hold on. Well, how many people extra are we talking about employing? What are we going to pay? And there's one piece that's left out of the Cassell's report, and that is the earnings that come in under international students, which is €400 million every year. That's not counted in on the revenue base for third level and higher education.
Okay.
So I would say, actually, you know, let's see what comes back from Europe. We'll get a fuller picture of what's happening, and we also need to think about what's happening, folks, for you students, for the future of jobs, and that's what we're looking at.
Just before I go to questions from the audience, I just want to ask you about two really quick questions, and I literally want yes or no answers to the question. I'll start with yourself, Angus. Is there an underfunding issue? Do you accept it in third level? And student loans, yes or no?
Yes, no.
Okay.
Yes, no.
Yes, no.
Okay.
Yes,
Donegan? Ivana?
Yes, no.
Massive underfunding and student loans will be the thin end of the wedge.
Micheál Martin said that he would consider it there
Well, it's not an
recently
arm-
at
Yes,
a
no.
debate, and the Students' Union president is actually nodding her head because we
you
know
toy with it.
he
It's
said
not-
that.
It's not in our manifesto. What Micheál Martin proposed before was that loans could come in maybe
For a little while.
maintenance as an alternative to loans you're already taking out from banks.
Okay.
But that's not something that's in our
Minister,
manifesto.
do you accept
It's
it?
not something-
Absolutely,
Underfunding issue?
a red line for me, no loans ever for students.
Okay.
And
Is
I
there an
believe
underfunding
that we
issue?
need more money. Of course we
that-
do.
is that in
In
your
all,
manifesto,
of course we do. The Taoiseach and I have said it so
Taoiseach
often,
hasn't
and
said
you
that.
have
The
heard
Taoiseach
it.
hasn't said that.
You have
What he
heard
said
it,
is-
Thomas.
Let the minister answer.
Yeah,
Is there
Thomas.
an underfunding issue?
We need more investment, absolutely, in every sector of education, be it preschools,
So there
primary,
is an
secondary.
underfunding
There
issue.
is, of
What the
course, and I
Taoiseach-
want to get more money
What
into
the
the
Taoiseach has
system.
said is that there's no UK-style loans.
But we have
which
to
are
do it
completely different to
prudently.
Loans,
Okay.
because nobody has proposed
It
that.
does strike me, listening to you all, that you all agree about there's a problem. But coming up with actually solutions and how this is going to be funded, I think is slightly different.
Well,
I'm not
I'll
sure I've
answer
heard
that,
answers to
Shane.
that.
I'll answer that if you give
Okay,
me
well,
time.
look, we might come back to. I do want to go out to the audience. We have Vish Gain, DCU master's student, who has a question. Vish, your question, please.
Hi, my name is Vish, and I'm a student of journalism from DCU. And first of all, I'm glad that all of us agree that student funding has reduced, or at least those not responsible for it agree that student funding has reduced over time. So my question is that simultaneously, along with the reduction in the funding, there has also been an increase in the demand for higher education in Ireland from both Irish students as well as international students, such as myself. So my question is, how will you, and this is addressed to all the party members, how will your party increase the capacity of the Irish higher education system in order to ensure that the 40,000 additional students over the next 10 years will be accommodated?
Okay. I'm not going to come to everyone on this question because we'll be here all night if we go to every speaker on every question, but I will bring people in equally. And by the way, we got loads and loads of questions in, so we have filtered through them and we will come to as many of them as we can. Richard Boyd-Barrett, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, well, we have to plan. It's called planning. You don't leave it to the market. You plan, you look at the demographics, and you ensure that you invest in providing the capacity. So that's basically the answer. It's worth just adding to that.
Yeah, but there's a bit more than planning to it now. It needs money.
What plan?
Yes,
Yes,
resources.
You absolutely
Where
need
are they?
resources. And I think what we need to recognise is that we have chronically low levels of investment compared to our European counterparts in public services and education generally. And we need to bring the level of investment and spending in education up to EU average levels. We are almost 20% below in public expenditure than the rest of Europe. That's why education is underfunded. That's why we've got a housing problem. That's why we've got a health problem. So let's just do what most other countries in Europe do as a minimum.
Okay, Ivana.
Well, thank you for the question, Vish. And I think it's true, of course we need to bring higher education funding up to European levels. But last night in the leaders' debate, Brendan Howland was the only party leader who made clear that to do that, we also need to ensure we have a sufficient tax base to fund higher education, as we should be funding education at all levels, including preschool. And I've just come from the Labour manifesto launch, and at that launch we made clear our priority is investment in public services, not giving tax breaks, not decreasing the taxes that people pay, but ensuring that we have adequate investment in public services, housing, health and education. And that's the way to ensure that we have capacity for the increasing student numbers. We have seen a big increase in student numbers. It's a big success story for Ireland. Others have talked about it. Our participation rates at third level are high. But we've seen funding reduce commensurately, with the result that that has affected our staff-student ratio. And we need to see better funding in place and a sustained commitment to funding to ensure that we can continue to attract students. Irish Research Council has done incredible things with a small budget, for example, in attracting research grants in. So that we need to see more
Ivana,
funding
we have your
there.
point. Minister, I'm going to bring you in then, and then I'm going to move on to another question. I will bring the other
So
speakers
I
in.
hear Richard saying we'll plan. We actually are planning, and we have put money into planning. So for demographics in higher education, just in higher education, in 2000, for the 2020 budget was 19 million extra. There was 74 million extra in the National Training Fund levy, and then the Human Capital Initiative was 60 million euro, and we have said how we will spend that Human Capital Initiative, 60 million every year for the next 5 years. So let me tell you, there is a plan. Yeah, but Cassell's, but I'm trying to say to you, Cassell's has left out pieces that, for example, he didn't take in the income that should have been taken in under the internationalisation piece for students. It's moved on, actually, since Mr. Peter Cassell's did that report. There's now, and nobody.
You don't sound like you have
sorry.
great confidence in Cassell's report.
No, I have, but I'll tell you what what I don't like about Cassell's. There's nothing about apprenticeships. There's nothing about further education. You know, we need to hear their voices, their students' voices at the table.
I'm not sure that was Cassell's job, but anyway. I'm going to go back
sorry,
to the...
education
No,
is
I'll bring you in
seamless,
next, President.
and students coming through want to make sure that, education is seamless and every student is important. It's not just the higher education student.
That's a very fair point. I don't
Yeah, well, Cassell's hasn't dealt with that.
Okay, Lorna Fitzpatrick from the USI. I think you have a question, Lorna. Are you? Oh, yeah, there you are. Sorry.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I suppose it's been referenced that it's the first time that the IUA, TIA and USI have came together calling for significant investment in higher education from the next government. And I suppose it's clear that the surplus in the National Training Fund is going to reach 1 billion by the end of the next year, after all planned expenditure is made. So I suppose we're looking for a commitment from you and from your party as to if you will invest part of that into higher education in 2020, 2021, and if you're willing to commit to that today.
Okay, Thomas Byrne. No, Ivana, you were already good. Thomas Byrne, going to come
Yeah,
to you.
well, first of all, I mean, I think the government has used the National Training Fund to say that they're increasing funding in higher education when, in fact, they've reduced core funding, actually, and then made it up with the National Training Fund. So I think they need to be kept completely separate.
Let's
no,
keep
it's
to
a
the
really
question.
important point.
Yeah,
This is a point because, you know, Mayor Micheal O'Connor has mentioned 60 and 74, 130 million. Then they cut the higher education. People need to look back at and USI did highlight this, and I did as well. They've cut actually core funding. So core funding is the key piece. So we're saying 100 million extra per year cumulative to higher education. And we can't have further education as a kind of a second class role for people. This is my worry about further education, that we keep bringing it up as something to deny people higher education.
Lorna's
On the
question.
National Training Fund, we've looked at that and we've been disappointed by how that's worked. But there appear to be European rules affecting the use of that fund that meant that we couldn't promise that in our manifesto. But what we've committed to doing is working with the European Commission to try to get that released, or certainly to work within those rules. But we weren't able to make commitments on that because of that. We felt that if we made them, people say, oh no, you can't do that. And that's certainly what we've been told by the Department of Education.
But sorry, just to be clear, if you can get the thumbs up from Europe on this, and I imagine, look, we've got some pretty creative people in the civil service. I imagine that's possible.
Yeah.
If that clearance is coming, would you commit to using some of that?
We don't want to use all of it because obviously you need to keep the National Training Fund there for back.
There's going to be 1.5 billion there.
No, but you should keep it. You know, a couple of 100 million perhaps. But you need to keep a large amount of it there for the lean days. So when the economy, if it, as
but
sick
at the
as
same
we-
time, if we're starving, you don't leave a huge amount in the bank for the
no,
rainy day.
No, you don't. You don't. But if unemployment starts going up or the economy goes down, then you need to have that there to retrain
200
people for
million,
new
is that
jobs.
what you're saying?
Or in fact, for automation or whatever, to retrain people in jobs.
200 million?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying,
You did say that, didn't you?
I'm saying perhaps. I'm saying
perhaps.
perhaps.
Okay,
But I'm saying
perhaps
that
200
nobody
million.
can commit to that at the moment.
Okay.
And what we're saying is you do need to keep some of it there,
All right,
and you
Thomas,
cannot promise
we
this.
have your point.
It's a
Well,
policy
Well,
or at the end of a rain.
Shakar, I'm actually going to agree with a little bit of that it is really important that we hold on to core funding.
Greens agreeing with Fianna Fáil.
Yeah, well, about core funding for higher education, absolutely
Might
do,
be the
because
last we've heard.
I was teaching in Queen's at the time when the fees were introduced between 2010 and 2016, and I saw that process happen where they believed that they could access more funds by introducing fees and loans and all of that kind of stuff, but what actually happened is the government reduced core funding in response, and it really changed the atmosphere.
Okay, let's stick to the point here.
But I do take that point about the national training. What we would be interested in that for is we believe that we should be looking at that to access things like apprenticeships. We would like to see more green apprenticeships. We believe we need to train up around 20,000 people to do all of the specific green jobs. That's at a cost of about 40 million.
Okay.
So for
So
those
is it a yes?
specific, that is a yes. That is a commitment for specific one-off
200
projects. but
million
you do-
around that figure? is
Well,
it?
for our 20,000, we need 40 million, but.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Angus and then Donnacha on this, and then I might just come to you for a quick word, Minister. Angus.
Yeah, thanks, Shane, and thanks for the question, Lorna. So the National Training Fund is part of the broader strategy of replacing government's direct funding for higher education with other sources of income. It originally started off with gradually increasing student fees in exchange for cutting back on the core grant. That increased to getting rid of the postgraduate grant, introducing postgraduate fees. Most leaders of higher education institutions in the room would know that they are absolutely dependent on the, frankly, absorbent fees they take from non-EU students here, like yourself, Nish, and the National Training Fund, which again is a levy on employers, which is money that is being taken instead of the grant. The problem with the NTF that's particularly pernicious, I'm getting here, is that it's a large pot of funding in the corner that nobody's allowed to touch. So this urgently needs to be addressed. The 1 billion surplus is obviously indefensible. What we have proposed in the Social Democrats, now bear with me because our manifesto is coming out on Friday.
Because we
is
do
what
want to get
proposed-
everybody else in. There's loads more questions.
Thanks. What we proposed in our last alternative budget was 150 million just to capital infrastructure in higher education, for example, as well as a 500 per student reduction in the fee at undergraduate level to be replaced by direct funding. So that's what I can say. As I say, our manifesto doesn't come out
You're
until
not
Friday.
committing in relation to that particular.
I
in
would
relation to the
tune
fund.
in when we launch our manifesto on Friday and you may be pleasantly surprised.
Might there be something in that manifesto?
You'll have to see.
Okay, wait and see. I don't know if I can wait that long. All right, Donnacha, you've been very patient there. What is Sinn Féin's take?
Like, I
on
mean,
this?
I think in some respects with the National Training Fund, like, I mean, there's the danger of letting the government off the hook for the lack of direct core exchequer investment in third level
Yeah,
education.
but there's a limited pot of money. Come on, let's
So,
deal with this.
Yeah, but
issue.
I'm making it very clear that we would, and I said that in my opening statement, and I'm not sure if it registered, but we will commit 117 additional million in direct core funding to the third level sector.
Okay.
And that's in relation to 27 to cover the demographics and the increased intake, 50,
It's a great
40,
amount of money. It's
and
probably not
40,
enough though. That's the
40.
point.
Nowhere near
No,
enough.
no,
It's not enough though.
No, but like, I mean, sorry, there's more than what's committed by Fianna Fáil. You're
No,
talking
it's
about 100. You're
100
talking
per
about
year,
yeah, and
500.
likewise, we're talking about that.
500 cumulative. It's
in relation
just cumulative.
to- Yes, yeah.
But then
yeah.
it's significantly in excess of what the IUA or cash was done
Okay.
for almost double, in fact.
Yeah,
Donnacha,
well, like, I mean, as I say,
You're
to
not
cover-
keen on the National Training Fund on reading that?
I like. I mean,
on
I think
using
you
that
have
money?
to take into account the fact that there is more people looking for apprenticeships than ever. Yet the funding available, the funding
1.5
going.
billion euros.
Just
It's
one
a
second.
colossal
Just one
sum
second.
of
Would you
money.
leave me finish the point, please?
Yeah.
Yet the amount of funding available for apprenticeships has actually fallen, and I think we need to deal with that. We're very ambitious in terms of apprenticeship. Want to increase the amount of apprenticeships up to about 60,000 per annum. National Training Fund is a key element of that. We need to use direct exchequer funding for third level education.
Okay,
Just
just
one-
very
one-
brief.
Sorry,
one
I
point.
missed-
Can I make
Yeah,
one
and
point
I
on the
do
National
wanna
Training
move
Fund,
on.
just on the surplus, and if there is any available? There is no building programme at the moment in further education, none whatsoever. So there's a lot of colleges out there, a couple in my own area, but all around the country, for apprenticeships, for post-leaving courses, aren't being built. And there will be call on the National
Okay.
Training Fund for that. So it may not be available.
Minister,
Sorry,
very, very
number
briefly.
one, there
Sorry.
are PPP agreements with all of our institutes of technology,
I'm talking about
and
further
they're
education.
drawing down money. They are also further education,
Okay.
delivering
Colleagues.
apprentices. But can I just go back to the National Training Fund?
Do, please.
Listen, we accessed that this year in the budget under the Human Capital Initiative to a maximum of 300 million over the next 5 years. So that's been done.
Yeah.
And again, I've had the meetings with the USI president, with TIA, with IUA on this. But what I will say, it is actually in the Fine Gael manifesto that we will seek to continue to access that
Okay.
funding under
So
the
60
National
million a year.
Training
Would
Fund.
you go higher than that?
No,
Would you
I'll
look at
tell
going
you,
quite a bit
60
higher?
million every year. But first of all, number one is the institutes are now applying for the grant. The rules are that there must be upskilling, there must be reskilling, because actually it's industry and business that have given the money. So that's number one. We want to see reform. We want to see numbers being delivered. We want to see courses being delivered for the future of jobs.
Okay.
And we are, and
All right.
sorry, it was in my department under my ministry
enough, Minister.
that we accessed actually the National Training
Okay,
Fund.
all right.
And
We're
can
gonna
I
go
just
on.
say
Yeah,
the department
you've
are
spoken
actually
for a while.
even working on that
And do I
as
not
we
get to answer
speak.
the question now?
Well, I didn't
No, I'm not
either.
going, sorry, hold on.
Come
I'm
back.
not going to go to every speaker on every question, okay? I will balance time out as much as I possibly can, but we'll be bogged down to about 3 or 4 questions, and I do want to get through other questions. Andrew Parr, Registrar of IADT in Dunleary, has a question. Andrew?
IADT.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm delighted to hear that everybody agrees that higher education needs more funding, but there's only a limited number of places it can come from. So my question is, what do the panel believe is the appropriate balance between general taxation and a student charge?
Okay. I think we're getting to the meat of things now, because it's very easy for everyone to say we need more funding. How you actually do that is difficult. Richard, you were very anxious to come in here. Do you want to answer that one?
I was.
And then Ivana, I'll
Yeah,
come to you.
absolutely no financial obstacles should be put in the way of anybody getting into education at any level. That is my opinion, and the inequality in access to higher education is shocking. I gave the facts earlier on about different areas in Dublin. It is utterly unacceptable. So we need to remove all fees, we need to restore and increase grants, and
And the balance in terms of where the rest of it comes on, the other part of the equation.
where do you get the money? Very easily. I mean, it's not rocket
It's
science.
not easy.
It is easy if you break from the neoliberal, low tax approach and the privatisation approach that has been pursued in this country, right? And it's not even radical socialism we're talking about here. It's about just bringing up public expenditure levels and taxes on wealth and capital to levels similar to those in Europe. And I'm going to keep repeating the point, because Shane said he didn't hear a suggestion. I've just pointed out twice now, and I'll say it again for a third time, 700 million euro is going in a tax break for R&D to private corporations. And that, by the way, is not going to your small indigenous business. That is going to about 10 companies. Now, would you rather research and development funds go to the latest, 15th upgrade of the Apple iPhone, or would you rather it went into blue sky research in universities and into removing financial fee obstacles and so on to people accessing third level education? It's a bit of a no-brainer.
Sorry, just to be clear, and I'm asking a question here, I don't know the answer. Are you saying there's absolutely no benefit from those tax breaks from R&D? Those companies probably employ, about 60,000 people here, 70,000 people or something?
That is only one of the tax
180
breaks they benefit
American
from,
companies.
Shane, okay? That's one of the tax breaks. I
Yeah.
mean, if you want me to go into intra-group
No,
transactions,
I don't.
that's which is called transfer pricing, that is costing the state in tax expenditures 11 billion euro a year, right? That's where one subsidiary of Apple lends money to another subsidiary and writes down profits as being a cost on their balance sheet, right? Which is just unbelievably
We're not here
shocking.
to rewrite international
okay,
tax laws,
so-
in fairness. Ivana?
It's our tax law. It's not
yeah,
international
it's a
tax
little
law,
more
it's our
complex,
tax
it's a
law. There are
little more
tax breaks
complex.
in our tax code.
Okay,
Well,
Ivana.
it would be an interesting academic exercise to start rewriting international tax laws here. here,
You're
but
technically academic,
but
I
back in the
suspect,
real
but
world, looking at
We closed down the double Irish, Shane.
looking at yes, Labour did that actually. We closed down the double Irish, and Labour abolished fees in 1996.
Under massive pressure.
Abolished third level fees. The last truly radical intervention by a political party in the third level system, and that did have a desired effect of increasing access greatly. And everyone here has been very positive about increased access. Where do we get the funding from, and what should be the balance, Andrew? In answer to your question, well, Castle sets out the options very clearly, and the option we favour is option 1, which is predominantly state-funded system, and that's an 80-20 balance. And as I'm sure you'll be well aware, it's 80-20. The state currently funds 64%.
You're keeping the student fee.
No, we're abolishing the student registration charge or fee, and we're going.
I do have to point out that
that was in
previous
the
election,
Castle's.
Labour did also promise to abolish that. It didn't
We
quite
capped,
work
but
out.
we ensured it was capped. I mean, that was as much as we could
that gonna
do.
take?
Well, that was as much as we could do after Fianna Fáil had bankrupted the country.
How long is that going to take? How long is it going to take?
As,
See,
what we're saying,
Okay,
Thomas, I didn't
Thomas, you
interrupt
come in
you.
a
I
second.
didn't interrupt you.
Let Ivana finish.
And can I just say this? In our manifesto, we have a reference to the National Training Fund, and we have a reference, as I've said, to ensuring that we have sufficient tax base to pay for the increased funding, the 1 billion over 15 years that Castle said is necessary to ensure that we avert the crisis in third level education. But even in option 1, predominantly state-funded, the Norwegian model, it's still only 80-20, and the 20% is made up from other sources, beyond direct state subvention. It's not as costly, perhaps, as people assume, because currently the state intervention is about 64-65% of third level.
Okay,
So we're moving to the Castle's option 1.
Yeah, I'd like to know in what time period are you moving to Castle's option 1? I mean, that's the problem I have with everybody's advocating free higher education. That's fine, and it's very laudable, and it's something we'd all like to do. But nobody said, is it year 1, is it year 5 of the next term of government, or is it some period into the future after that?
It can be done with political will, and we
But
did it
what
before in
time- what
1992.
What time frame?
We did it in 1992 when
What
Labour
time
were in
frame?
government then. And I think the reality is you could do it over the term of an ex-government.
What time? We saw the promises from Labour in 2011. Look, I mean, we need to ensure access. We've seen, I mean, in terms of, I know what Ivana said with Labour, so we've seen a Fáil has done over the years. You know,
We know what you've done over the years.
Access to primary, second level education free. Patrick Hillary set up the
2011.
Institute of Technology. Even Trinity College itself came into the state system, through a state funding system, through the relationship that Amy de Valera would have had with the Provost at the time. So we have a long history in that, and we want to continue that. But we don't want to make promises that we can't keep. But we do want to set up a Department of Higher Education and give significant and needed and cannot do without funding to the sector over the next 5 years.
Angus and Whelan.
Yeah, sorry, I just can't let that Senator Bacik claim that the Labour Party abolished tuition fees.
Well, we did.
In 1997, no, they didn't.
96.
£150 was the original student fee. £150. The current tuition fee of €3,000 is the great grandson of that £150 fee.
Absolutely.
The fee was never entirely eliminated. We have never had free education in this country yet.
Well, can I just say this? The
Ivana?
Free Fees Initiative introduced under Labour, and apologies, in 1996, was a huge change. I mean, Angus, you're too young, but I recall fees going up by 10% every year when I was in student in the 80s. When I was president of Trinity Students' Union, we had huge marches and campaigns. Fees were astronomical, and the way they were paid for was people who could afford to do so took out tax covenants. The cost of the tax covenant, as anyone around the 80s will recall, was so great, became so great to the state, and yet was closing off access to third level for disadvantaged backgrounds, that the Free Fees Initiative was a very, very positive development that wasn't hugely costly at the time, and it was done at a time when the state was less prosperous than it is now, and it was done because we believe in universal access. Yes, the student registration charge subsequently began to creep up, and yes, under bankruptcy in 2011, it did go up, but we did cap it at 3,000. It should now be abolished.
I want to go back to the audience very briefly.
Yeah, look, I mean, whatever about the decision of Minister Neil Binochlick, I mean, which I believe is welcome, and I have no problem recognising that, but it is the case that it was an absolutely brazen U-turn at the time of the 2011 government to increase fees substantially, and I believe it has contributed to significant obstacles to many students being able to access third level.
Okay.
I favour public funded education. We've provided for not only for additional funding, but we've also provided for the cost of eliminating third level fees over the course of government, and the detail of that is in our manifesto. It can be done, and it is actually not that unusual across many European jurisdictions, across the Nordic countries, and in Scotland. It is entirely possible to have a well-funded, publicly funded education, third level education system. That's what we want to do.
Okay, all right. Let's go to the centre of the country now for our next question. Ciarán O'Cahan at Lowen Institute of Technology. Are you here? Hi, Ciarán. You have a question for our panel.
The recent report by the HEA shows that we have a higher proportion of socio-economically disadvantaged students within the Institute of Technology sector based on the high deprivation indices. And I'm wondering what the parties will do in terms of trying to redress that imbalance that's there for our students.
Minister, do you accept that imbalance is there? Do you accept that point?
Yes, I've seen figures actually, and first of all, thanks very much, Ciarán O'Cahan, and if I can congratulate you for now going in with Leinster or Limerick IT, and hopefully we will deliver a technological university in the middle in Ireland, in the Midlands. So I thank you. Just to answer your question, yes, we know those statistics, and we are funding. We've also in our manifesto talking about how we will increase the SUSI base for students to access SUSI grants. I'd like to see more students in our institutes of technology. That is the reason why I have been driving forward that whole technological university model to ensure that students now will be able to access education in their own regions. They won't have to come to Dublin or Galway or Cork or to the cities, but you will be able to deliver in your region. So, you know, that will cut the expenses for students, and also then it will provide secondary schools access for their students into those technological universities.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's a kind of a key issue if we're serious about kind of social mobility and giving people all sorts of options, and apprenticeships certainly are part of that. We would like to see SUSI increase by around 10% and 27 million put towards those kind of access supports. And we really do see those as beginning, as I said, in the post-primary schooling, that that there would be options and made possible for people to think about where they might be headed in life. But also, I mean, we have talked a lot about fees. Those are not the only barriers to participating in higher education. So again, we're back to issues around disability, around social stratification, but also things like housing and transport. So, for example, we would like to give free student transport for everybody in the country. That would be 60 million.
Okay. All right. No, actually, do you know what? I'm going to go back to you, and I will, bring you in, because there's two questions on research. I'm going to take them together because we're kind of running out of time a little bit. Sinead Reardon of the Royal Irish Academy and Leonard Hobbs of the Trinity Research and Innovation Group. Both of your questions, I think I'm right in saying, relate to research. Sinead, are you here? Could we get your question?
Yeah.
There you are, Sinead. Thank you.
How will you balance the need for investment in research priority areas with investment in blue skies research?
Okay, blue skies investment. How do you balance the research prioritisation investment with investment in blue skies research? Thanks for that, Sinead. Leonard, your question. Leonard Hobbs.
Yeah, thanks for squeezing us in at the end there, Shane. It's a bit disappointing the research only gets to mention now. But the research spend...
As many issues as we can. There's still, it's as good now as at the start.
Okay, the research spend in Ireland has dropped over 20% in 10 years. And as a percentage of our spend in overall GDP is dropping consistently, which means we're falling down the league table, and we're in a place now that we're uncompetitive relative to other countries, which is pretty serious when you consider the implications that might have. So the question then is, what are we going to do about an increase in public spending in research, which is as I said, has been dropping consistently now for over 10 years.
Okay. Ivana, we'll start with you.
Thanks very much, Shane.
Can we just try and get through everything?
Yeah, very briefly.
Relatively brief.
Thank you, and I'm delighted the research question has come up. I mentioned the Irish Research Council, which does a huge amount with, I think, a budget of about 40 million, and really to see an increase there would be hugely important. They fund research across all disciplines. I should confess to having been a recipient of a small grant before from them, but that's the sort of balance we need to see to ensure that we don't direct all our research funding to STEM subjects, important though they are. I spoke earlier about my critique or my concern about the recent initiative, the Human Capital Initiative, that it seems to be too much oriented towards STEM, towards vocational, towards, in other words, feeding people into sectors where into industry. We need to ensure better blue sky creativity research funding as well. In fact, the OECD has recently pointed out the need to ensure funding for research and education in arts and creative sectors. There's a great quote, Andreas Schleicher, who's one of the experts from the OECD, who says says the modern world doesn't reward you for what you know, but for what you can do with what you know. And arts, humanities and creative sectors produce and provide that sort of broader level education that we need to see a lot funded alongside STEM subjects.
Richard Boydard.
Yeah, well, our package, first of all, overall investment for next year is 439 million, which, by the way, just to put it in context, is less than 0.5% of our GDP, to put that much additional money into education. But beyond that, but the two things are connected, we need to break the marketisation of education and research generally. Because if you don't have enough public funding, then you're forced to go to billionaire philanthropists or to the pharmaceutical industry and various others who will want to dictate what type of research you do and ensure it gets the quickest return. And even some public research funding is linked to this. I remember when the Science Foundation of Ireland Act was in the Dáil, I argued very, very strongly that the emphasis of that was pushing the SFI and research funding towards essentially being dependent on the diktats of private for-profit companies. We have to end that. Academics, researchers should not in any way be dictated to by for-profit and short-term for-profit interests most of the time in terms of the sort of research they do. It will affect its quality in terms of healthcare. It may even affect public health because often the private for-profit companies will be more interested in getting something on the market than actually having the best based health research.
Sorry to cut you off, but time is a little bit against us. Angus, I know I'll come to everyone on this. So Angus?
So we proposed before increasing our research and development overall pot to 2.5% of GNP. GDP is a difficult statistic in Ireland, as you know. So that has to include things like a significant extra investment in blue sky basic fundamental research. Because very often the biggest breakthroughs, the things that we don't see coming, and there are countless examples of them, come from fundamental research. And if I may, in this question, as a way of making it up to Senator Bacik, agree with her in saying that we do also need to make sure that we don't leave the arts, humanities and social sciences behind. Exclusive investment in STEM or massively skewed in favour of STEM is massively threatening. And again, we need only to look at the reason people come here, the reason we have our tourists, the reason we have our international brand is largely due to our arts, humanities and social sciences. Thus far, although science is growing in that regard.
Okay, thanks for that. Donnacha.
Well, I think, yes, absolutely. There is certainly an issue that there is huge pressure to invest in research and development that relates to STEM that can benefit business, and I think there absolutely has to be space created for blue sky research, for research that is, I suppose, has its own inherent value, even aside from its benefit to business. The other point I want to make just in relation to research is very often PhD candidates and postdoctoral researchers are on very low pay. Their stipends are very, very low, and the pay for postdoctoral researchers, as I say, very low. Carry an awful lot of water in the university system, do an awful lot of teaching and guidance, and I think they're probably not recognised properly for it.
Thank you. Thomas Byrne.
Yeah, I was going to get back at the Minister on some of the points you made previously, but I better answer this question first. Look, I mean, the Department of Higher Education will be the Department of Higher Education and Research, and that's to bring it more centrally into government, because quite frankly, it's in some other departments, not in education, which is where it should be, but research should be in the Department of Higher Education, as we've been proposing, not in the Department of Business, and that has moved the focus away from basic research towards applied. They're all important, they have to happen. We saw huge benefits of research in the centenaries, the 1916 War of Independence. Massive amount of research, the academics having huge importance in the public sphere, in public debate. That's what we want to go. We want to let academics lead this, and we are worried by some of the trends in government where you see the National Development Plan has objectives in terms of research, or very specific programs. We want to let academics and researchers do the work, and let us have that thinking and see where that thinking leads us, and to follow that. Can I just say, just in relation to what Minister O'Connor said about people can stay in their local areas, and that's fine if they're poor or whatever. And Minister McHugh said last summer, Minister McHugh, well, disadvantaged areas. Minister McHugh said last summer that people can consider regional options. This harks back to that. Look, institutes, regional, the technology universities are not generally speaking, not going to be teaching medicine, not going to be teaching veterinary and other subjects.
All right, we have
If you
that
want
point.
to, your ambition should lead you where it leads you. And we cannot have this thing, that'll do you, or this'll do you.
All right,
Each
Minister,
institution is
Minister,
fantastic,
on
but we
R&D,
must have that
on
ambition
the
and allow
R&D
everybody
question.
reach that
Right,
ambition.
back to R&D. So the investment from the HEA for the higher education institutions was 230 million last year, and the Research Council 47 million. I absolutely, and I've met the research, I see Jane Ulmer up there from the Research Council. I have met you, I've met the Irish University Association and indeed USI and TIA. I do believe that we need to rebalance the investment into pure research and applied research. But that is not to say that we cut money from applied. What we need to do is put more money into pure research, because it's there, that it's in the universities, it's in our institutions,
Minister,
where that blue sky thinking comes through.
Very quickly, I don't know if anyone has taken the time to read the Green Party Manifesto, but it's actually not for the first 5 years, it's for the next 10 years. And one of the first things we say in it is that many of you who are in university now will be doing jobs in 10 or 20 years that don't actually exist right now. So we massively support blue sky research. I think really what we need to do within the Irish context is support staff and PhD students to give them the time. They're under such immense pressure to do admin and to do research and to do teaching that we really need to fund staff to take the time for both the applied and the blue sky.
Okay, I want to finish with you guys. Our second last question, it's a yes or no answer. Fianna Fáil's idea for a minister of higher education and research. Sorry, a department. I was going to say
Not a minister.
Full cabinet.
A full cabinet ministry for higher education and research. Yes or no?
No, that's an unfair question. Because I'll tell you why. Who are you what department and what minister are you getting rid of? Because the Constitution says you can only have 15 ministers. So are you getting rid of agriculture? Are you getting rid of justice? Who are you getting rid of, Thomas?
Minister, I'll give you two.
And actually, I'd love the job. I'd actually love the job, but I don't think it can happen because the Constitution.
We changed ministries the whole time. We didn't have a minister for children 10 years ago.
Yeah, but are we going to get rid of the Ministry of Children?
Well,
which one?
arguably,
No, Thomas
yes,
needs to
that's the
answer
argument.
that. Thomas, which one are you getting rid of?
All of these things would be
The
considered.
rural affairs, justice, social.
Yes or no?
I think that's really reductive. It'd be more interesting to have the discussion on the basis of, do we really want to disintegrate higher education from primary and post-primary?
I agree. I
And
think
that's really
seamless
regressive.
All right, I did ask for yes or no. I haven't got a yes or no from anyone yet. That's a no, Richard.
To be honest, I'd
Wants
be
to
open
do
to
yes
it, but
and
you can't just on the hop because Fianna Fáil come up with a suggestion, just say, well, that's it.
Well, it's not just on the hop. Hang on, hold on. This is the main opposition party who's ahead in the polls saying they're going to do this.
Well, listen, I tell you, if we followed everything Fianna Fáil told us to do, we'd really be in a dire straits.
It's a legitimate thing to ask. It's a legitimate thing to ask. But the idea that because you have somebody with a title that solves all the problems, it didn't work for the Gaeltacht in the past. It didn't work for the Department of Environment, and it didn't help us in those issues.
Where are
Angus?
I mean,
yes or no?
I think the Constitution does limit the cabinet to 15 members, so Minister Mitchell-O'Connor is right in that. But what I would say, it is critical to keep education with education and not do as has been done in the UK, among others, by putting education and research with business. And that's critical that we keep it as education.
And can I say, I agree, I think we should keep education together because this is about the holistic picture. We can't tackle issues around diversity of access to third level without tackling educational disadvantage at preschool, primary and secondary level. That's something my colleague Ivana Reardon has been saying for years from his experience. I think he's right. So I would say, let's have a beefed up department of higher education, absolutely. But I think education requires a voice at the cabinet table.
Look, higher education is already siloed within the Department of Education. There's its own structure in there. And what it needs is a senior minister, and that's how we strengthen it, by having a senior minister sitting equally at the cabinet table, fighting for funding, because it's not working up to now.
And sorry, where is further education? Where are apprenticeships? It's not all about higher education.
Just to finish,
we don't know where they are. We don't know where apprentices are.
You know well where they are.
Sorry, just to finish,
you wiped them out.
Department of Jobs.
We're out of time. Just to finish, I'm sorry to those we didn't get to your questions, but I think we got through a lot. I'm just going to ask each of you to finish. I don't want you speaking for a minute. Just let's keep it tight. If you were Minister for Education in 6 weeks' time, first priority, what do you want to do? And just I suppose, a thought to leave everybody with today? Minister, I'll start with you.
I want to make sure that students get the very best experience in our higher education, in our primary schools and in our secondary schools, in our colleges of further education and in our apprenticeships. And we should not be trying to silo it. We should not be looking for, different departments for further education. It needs now all to come through a department, and I really would like to see extra funding. And how we'll do that is to make sure that we have a strong economy, we have people working, we have a revenue base there, and then we'll be able to pay for more services. And students first.
Okay, Thomas Byrne.
Well, my whole approach to higher education and further education is informed by my late father, who did his leaving cert. My mother didn't go to secondary school, but walking by up to Grafton Street every Christmas, stopping outside this college, I want my kids to go here. He had that ambition for me, and I think that everybody should be able to have that ambition for higher education to get through. And access to as many as possible and to ensure that the funding is there is what would be key for me as Minister for Higher Education. I urge to look not only at Fianna Fáil's record over the decades in education, but in the last Dáil term, in terms of which party has been consistently highlighting issues at all levels of the educational sector.
Two quick things. I'd first commit to implementing Castle's option 1, predominantly state-funded system of third-level education, abolish student contribution, and in parallel with that, invest heavily in a state-funded childcare scheme for preschool education to try and tackle disadvantage at the root level, at the cause of it. And it's in the Labour manifesto to do that alongside ensuring public investment in public services.
Donegal.
I think, I suppose everyone should have the opportunity to have the best possible education they should have. It's a question I suppose I wanted to come back to earlier, but I suppose I can't just. But briefly, it starts absolutely at early years and at primary level. And I believe particularly we need to invest in DESH Band 2 as well as DESH Band 1 in relation to that. But in relation to the third level sector, there's an awful lot of students out there struggling at the minute to make ends meet. I would increase the maintenance grant is the first budgetary investment I would make, as well as then increasing the direct core funding to the third level sector.
Yeah, Nasa Harrigan.
Yeah, I think the two things that I would want to take action on is inclusion, and I do believe that starts at a very, very early age, and it's not just about economic barriers, that are certainly very important, and quality. And I think that's a discussion that has to happen amongst students and staff, not just students themselves. And I have seen a marked change in the sector in the last decade, and it's still time to reverse some of that change.
Okay, which point there?
Yeah, abolish all fees, increase the grants, any financial or other obstacles, remove them to access to third level education. End precarity for people working in third level education, give them income and employment, security, and bring education and arts funding, by the way, just to mention that, up to European levels. We're funding arts at 0.1% as against a 0.6% in the rest of Europe. For one of our greatest assets, it's just shocking, the underfunding of the arts.
Thanks, Richard. Angus O'Whalen, you the first word, you're going to have the last word.
Yes, thank you. The question was the first thing we'd do. It wasn't that. For me, it would have to be to take the HEA's National Access Plan, which deals with granting access to higher education equally across the entirety of society, and start working through that. Specifically, what we have to do is we need to look at the way the SUSI grant is calculated, and deal with that dramatically. The fact that all of Dublin, for example, is counted as adjacent to Maynooth under the changes in the 2011 government needs to be addressed immediately. But also, the financial barriers to education are just one, and in many cases, not even the most important barrier for many people accessing education.
Okay, I think everybody in the room will agree how important third level education is. I personally think it's disappointing it hasn't been a bigger part of the campaign, but look, we owe, I think, a huge appreciation to our 7 speakers today. They should be out in the campaign trail. They're here talking about an issue they're passionate about. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. That's it.